Hello, everyone. This is Gary London. I am Senior Principal of London Motor Advisors. And this is kind of a post-election monologue on some of the things that I think might transpire over the next few years in terms specifically of the economy and even more specifically of the real estate market. Now that the election has settled, we have a new administration coming in a couple of months. And I thought that quite frankly, I'd share some thoughts because I've been asked by clients and by friends to offer up some commentary on what I think is going to happen. And I'm going to approach this with a lot of humility. Firstly, because I have to admit, I didn't expect nor appreciate both the results and the mood of the electorate in the election. Perhaps it's because I'm living in my own Southern California bubble. But I will tell you that I've been through 14 presidencies in my lifetime, starting with the moment after birth. And, you know, politics cycle and situation cycle, both politically and economically. So, I don't think for those of you who were despondent with the conclusion of the election, you ought to feel that particularly despondent. Things will ultimately cycle the other way, whether President Trump is successful or not. And we all hope that he's successful. And that's sort of the humble part of it is even if you didn't support him, and let's face it, this is a 50-50 nation. What separated Harris from Trump in the swing states was 237,000 votes. It was an enormous electoral college victory, but it was a very tight, the polls were right, victory that was attained by Trump ultimately sweeping the swing states, but at relatively narrow margin. This remains a 50-50 nation. I should say with the exception of Arizona, which was, I guess, over a 5-point difference. So he did have a significant impact there. But I guess I have to tell you that, in my opinion, nothing has changed about America in terms of Republicans versus Democrats. I think that the big difference in our society today is the amplification from social media. Of course, we're on social media now, so here I am talking to however number of people, telling you that by virtue of the fact that you have access to social media, you sort of amp up both your grievances and your opinions, and that has to some extent resulted in the success of the presidency, attainment of the presidency by Trump. And that's sort of a big deal that we're going to have to deal with in the coming years. So I guess what I'm trying to tell you is that I can't predict the future, but I don't think that America is all that much changed and things will cycle back. So having said all that by way of prelude, let me say that I'm going to focus on just a few things that I think really matter in the coming years. And those relate to the impact that the presidency has on the economy, and then some specific issues that have resonated with my clients, with my industry, and with my region. And these relate to obviously the main issues that the Trump presidency is based on, which is addressing migration, addressing tariffs, limiting the government, creating limitations in the government, in other words, reducing the bureaucracy, and then some issues that I think are going to sort of represent outgrowths from that. First of all, let me talk about what I really think happened in the election. While all the metrics were strong in terms of the economy, unemployment was low, GDP is growing, inflation was coming under control towards the targeted areas. All these factors and lots of others were strong. The metrics are good. The difference is that the lived economy, the day-to-day economy that all of us have experienced, wasn't happening in people's favor fast enough. And I think that sort of boils down to what is the price of eggs and gas and other things. And, these things take time to stabilize regardless of what administration is in place. So I think basically the snapshot on November 5th was that even inflation was coming down. It still means prices are going up. They haven't stabilized, and a lot of people were still feeling the impact, and presidencies take the blame and the credit when that happens. But ironically, the presidency doesn't have that much to do with the state of the economy. And I guess what's important about that comment is that it'll be really interesting to see what the Trump administration actually does achieve or not achieve with respect to economic prosperity. And I worry about everything with respect to this. I'm going to start with this and I'm going to end with this. Probably the best thing that the Trump administration could do with respect to the economy is nothing. Let me repeat that. Probably the best thing that the Trump administration can do with respect to the economy is nothing. As I said a moment ago, all the metrics are strong. It would be probably prudent not to tamper with anything. But having said that, President Trump is not even in office yet, and he's already threatened tariffs. Now, what is the problem with tariffs? Tariffs is probably a terrible idea. Not everybody agrees with me, but major economists suggest with good reference that tariffs would be quite inflationary. They would drive prices up, that ultimately American consumers would pay the price of goods not being able to come into this country that are manufactured in other countries. It creates scarcity and it does drive prices up. So I'm not sure how that helps in any way. To a large extent, tariffs is a political thing too. I mean, essentially what we're talking about is the U.S. versus China. And while I like the idea that the threat of tariffs and even the use of tariffs can be a tool in the toolbox of the presidency to do certain things. President Trump has said, for instance, that he'd like to use that as his hammer to, for instance, reduce the flow of fentanyl and other illegal drugs. Well, none of us can disagree with the fact that we'd like to, cut that supply off from China that's coming into the U.S. And if tariffs are the tool to do that over the short term, maybe that's a good thing, even at the cost of sort of the inflation concerns that I and a lot of other people have. So it remains to be seen what's going to happen in the tariff front. Right now, it's a threat. It's a threat because he's not in office yet. It might be a threat when he's in office. There'll be perhaps some discussion, certainly some discussion between the U.S., Mexico, Canada, and of course China as to what the extent of tariffs are, if any. So that's going to be a big issue. Some of it real, some of it imagined. But in terms of the economic consequences of tariffs, that's sort of a big deal, which leads naturally to the concern about the real estate markets and particularly the housing markets. What is festering the housing market is a limitation of supply and a cost of money issue. Let me start with the cost of money issue. Cost of money is directly related to the cost of 10-year Treasury bonds. If you follow the bonds and with their movement, typically you'll understand what the movement is of mortgage rates. Mortgage rates have not dipped down that much. They've sort of stabilized closer at 7% right now. And most economists expected that they would go down. But with the advent of tariffs on the horizon, that creates the prospect that in order to sort of gin up the economy, we're going to have to borrow more as a government. And when the government has to borrow more, increase risks, increase the cost of money, bonds rates go up. And that's being reflected in the money market right now. So over the foreseeable future, I'm not expecting a reduction much in interest rates until this whole issue of tariffs sort of works its way out. And if it doesn't, if we do see tariffs come in and we have to sort of substitute domestic money, federal money into the picture, that's going to increase or keep high the cost of money. So I think that's something that's directly related. The other thing with respect to the cost of money is the migration issue. And here we have a really interesting situation where obviously the Trump administration wants to, in a clean sweep, get rid of a lot of migrants. We all agree that we have a migrant problem. We all have different opinions of the cause of it or particularly what the solution is. But he's coming in with sort of a mandate to address the migration problem. Well, how does that affect the economy? First of all, if he's successful, finds the money somewhere, finds the resources, finds the jails, finds the personnel, creates a legal way to do it all, and gets rid of millions of people. What he's doing is he's inevitably getting rid of millions of workers. When you get rid of millions of workers, you have a couple of problems that come up. First of all, jobs go vacant and they're not going to be fulfilled by Americans. That's going to be a big issue. It'll probably be a big driver in economic change. The other issue is that with respect to the construction industry, migrants are highly engaged in the construction sector. So if we really have a housing shortage, and we do, and the solution is to build more housing. And by the way, that really is the solution. The solution wasn't what prospective Vice President Harris suggested, which was to, put money in the hands of potential buyers and let them go out and buy homes. Well, if you go out, if you put money in their hands, it's both going to drive up the cost of housing because we're not building enough housing. It's really a supply issue. And if part of the supply issue is related to having enough personnel on hand to build the housing, and the people that are building that housing to a large extent in that workforce are migrants, then you can see how these two issues are related. So I worry about the housing market from both a adding of housing perspective and the cost of housing perspective. I think that another big issue is the coming up that really hasn't taken a lot of prominence in the administration or in the debate is the issue of insurance. Clearly, climate change, or maybe not clearly, maybe some kind of irony of circumstances has created terrible storms, particularly in the southeast region of the U.S. Hurricanes, flooding, that sort of thing, all of which have created disaster that will either result in people moving out of those areas, which is one thing that we need to address as a nation, the movement of people from these most impacted areas to places that are less impacted, and how the federal government deals with that. And then the other issue is, how do you rebuild, in the federal government's role in that, and how does the insurance industry sort of address that? An industry that presumably has taken lots of losses in those areas. And by the way, it's not just those areas. Here in California, it's wildfire as well, which are driving up insurance rates and probably ultimately to unsustainable levels. So at some point, the states and the federal government have to get involved in addressing the insurance crisis. And I think that is a huge problem that needs to be addressed. I have to say that one of the real positives that could come out of this new administration is this devotion to fiscal restraint and trying to cut out some of the backbone bureaucracy in this country, which is very costly and has contributed to our national debt. And I'd like to see, I think as most people would, a real aggressive effort in the area of reducing the deficit, reducing the federal budget. However, I will say that that's going to become a very dicey proposition because there are a lot of places in our federal budget that we either can't touch or haven't shown the political or moral backbone to touch. And those are the obvious places: Social Security, Medicare, military spending is a big issue. So however Trump or his buddy Elon Musk want to address that, well, good on them to make an effort. Whether it's going to result in much, we will see. If it's just becomes sort of a retribution thing with the Justice Department, all that doesn't involve, I don't think, a lot of fiscal accomplishment. It just creates a lot of chaos, which is sort of one of the last things that I want to address here. I think a lot of people don't remember what happened in the Trump administration. Hopefully, it doesn't get repeated again. There was a lot of chaos going on. Every day was a different headline about something or other that we all had our heads spinning about. And what I'm hoping is that Trump and the people around them are a little bit more competent. I don't have a lot of hope here, but I do have some hope that they're a little bit more competent in creating some stabilization in how they govern and how they sort of address cutbacks and how they address governing in general. So I'm really concerned about just competence and chaos, and that leads, I guess, to the last thing, which is that what we're going to experience is something that, even though I'm talking about the next few years, is highly unpredictable. None of us know what's going to happen with the future. One area that I stayed away from in this monologue is what happens in international relations, beyond tariffs, what happens with the wars that we're supporting in both the Middle East and Ukraine. These are huge issues. They might be more important in terms of our security as a nation than all these other issues combined. So we don't know what's going to happen there, and there's no way that we really can predict what can happen in any of these areas. But what we can hope for is that regardless of what your political persuasion is, that we want the administration to succeed. Because if the presidency succeeds, we all succeed. And so I approach this with again, a lot of humility that something good will come out of this new administration. For those of you who supported Trump, you've got a lot of positive feelings, and good for you. For those of you that didn't support him, I think that instead of just, curling up, what you want to do is fight back against the things that you don't believe in and hope that he succeeds beyond your expectation in terms of the things that will help all of us economically, politically, in terms of our health. But we have a huge amount of uncertainty going forward in this nation. And I think it's important that we all sort of approach it with some positiveness and certainly a high level of humility. With that, I will stop. Thank you so much. I hope this is a little bit helpful. My name is Gary London. I am Senior Principal of London Motor Advisors. I will see you soon.